Hey friends, welcome to another episode of KPC Podcast, which is just slowly becoming the name of this thing. We're grateful to have you with us and talking through some of the questions related to Sunday morning and more specifically related to the passage that we preach through toward greater application in your life. And one of the things that we've been asking for is some feedback. We've been asking for questions, and we've been asking for comments to be sent to questions at KPC. CourtRightChurch.org.
There you go.
One day I'll learn this. And we have both of those this morning. So we received a good question in that we're going to discuss in a little bit. And we also received some feedback from last week's episode. So last week, rules were a little bit reversed. I got to sit interviewing Lindsay after she preached. And we talked around the idea of Sabbath. One of the questions that we left you with was... just describe some of your own Sabbath practices, and I think in a hopes that we would be able to encourage each other to practice Sabbath a little bit more intentionally. We received some suggestions or some comments on what's working for some folks. So
this is great. There was one family, they gave just like a little mini list of some of the things that they've been doing, which is great. They mentioned no tech Sundays. That you said that's a hard one to keep with kids needing computers for school. But loosely, they try to do no YouTube videos, digital entertainment. So that's one thing they do. They do Sunday walks with the dog in an off-leash area. They do visits with family, which is always great. They do Sunday evening board game night, which is that's great.
Goes hand in hand with the no tech.
Yeah,
Sundays,
exactly.
Right? Yep.
Yeah. That's one of our go-tos. Like pull out Uno. Skip bow, things like that. Yeah,
I have Uno card remaining from my Uno deck. Like it's just lost.
Oh no! We have three. I could let you borrow one. We have Mario Kart Uno.
Oh,
we have Uno All Wild, which is like all the cards are crazy.
Okay,
and then just regular Uno.
That's chaotic.
Yeah. It's great. And then finally, supper. They always say supper is simple with smoothies and fresh from the oven muffins, which I love that. It's like barely, you don't have to cook a crazy meal or something like that to enjoy.
I do like that. Yeah. I like all of those. I would love to include all of those practices in my Sabbath practice. It's interesting how we've taken like a lot of those, so I think I'm safe in saying none of those were in the original iterations of the law around Sabbath. However, all of them make sense.
Yeah.
In terms of what a biblical view of Sabbath would include. And so I love that piece. Like there's intentional time together with family. So there's cultivating good, rich relationships. They mention Sunday. So I'm assuming church is in there. There's intentional, I would say like fasting from technology, to use that language, which is different than fasting from food, but to intentionally go without something for the sake of something else. And so, you do see people who still observe the Sabbath would, I think consider in some ways technology to be work of some sort.
Right.
And so that's, off the table. And I just think that's great. Like go a day without your phone. It's hard. I love that. So the smoothies and muffins, you've got to plan for that. There needs to be preparation ahead of time. You got to think it through. It's intentional, and you're trying not to cook. Like we're not working.
And it's
like
simple.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
I love all of those.
That's great.
If you could include one of those, just try one of those this week. I'm gonna try the smoothie one. Yeah,
that's great.
Awesome. So we got some questions for Luke 6.
Yeah.
Still in Luke 6.
So this week, well, this is only our second week in Luke 6, right?
Yeah, I'm just preparing.
That's right. It's good, but it's going to get into some real intense stuff at the church here. We're going to be doing our community Bible study starting this week and throughout the month of May, and it will be exclusively dealing with some of the segments from Luke chapter 6. And this is sort of the precursor. It's sort of the, as you described and as N.T. Wright described, it's sort of the huddle. It's the huddle with the football team, soccer team, or hockey team or whatever before the, you know, they're given the game plan, but you got to gather around first, right? And that's kind of what's happening here. Jesus calls the disciples. He calls the 12, particularly distinguishes between disciples, broader, and apostles, who in this case was 12, which we'll get into that a little bit more later, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there were only 12, period. So yeah, there's a great little game plan. And then you see this, you know, this kingdom moment where, you know, Jesus is just there and people are being healed and, receiving cures from impure spirits, and just the power of the kingdom just flowing out all over the place, which is like pretty cool. So got all this happening right before these really meaningful teachings that Jesus provides. And so we have this unique little moment here. And you touched on this idea of the symbolism. You talked about the alarm bell of like, hey, this should be ringing some bells when you hear some of this language of the 12, language, you know, that would harken back to the 12 tribes of Israel, and language that would bring us back to many parts of the scriptures, from Genesis to beyond to the Kings. But particularly here, there is this image of Moses ascending the mountain and returning. And that seems to be the most poignant image that is created there. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think certainly going up the mountain, whether be it Moses or, you know, I think certainly Moses going up the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments is probably the most significant, one of the most significant you know, moments in biblical Israel's history. So, So, you know,
because Jesus, in some ways, he's ascending, he comes back down, and he's like, okay, we got to talk, you know, like there is definitely some of that there. So one of the questions that I had, this is not one of our reader questions, but one that I thought was a good place to start, was, and I know we're kind of veering into the, you know, speculating a little bit, but I think it's a worthwhile speculation of how would the hearers have heard this? How would the early hearers, the early readers, those who were present, you know, let's say for the first century post Jesus, during that time, how would they have seen these events? For those who would have certainly had the Jews would have certainly had a framework for the symbolism. There are a lot of, when you read through the entire Bible, there are a lot of numbers are very important. A lot of repeated patterns are very important. They symbolize something that's very meaningful. And so, would they have received this as like deeply offensive? Would this have been scandalous? Would this have provoked curiosity? Would this have given them hope? Yeah, like I'm just trying to think through what this would have meant to the people.
So I feel like the safe answer is just yes to all of those, right?
Yeah.
You know, I do want to be, on the one hand, I think there's a fairly straightforward answer, and I think the answer is yes. I think people would have seen what Jesus is doing, and that would have stirred in them something. We see that's not the same thing for everybody, right? So the crowds follow him. Obviously, like the crowd here is growing. So not only do we have like all over Judea, we also have Jerusalem being included here, like the religious for Israel, for Jewish followers of God. Like this is, everything happens around temple, and so they're coming out from like the center of the religious universe in their understanding to see Jesus, to hear his teaching, to be healed, to see what's happening, to see other people being healed, like for whatever reason, be it curiosity or commitment, like conviction, or judgment, anger, concern. You see all of it. At least I think we see all of it, not only from Judea and Jerusalem, but now from Tyre and Sidon as well, which were, I believe, Phoenician provinces of Rome. And I might be wrong on that. Somebody can fact check me and let me know. But distinctly not Jewish, or not overtly Jewish areas. And so like the crowd's growing here. So I think it's fair to say in Luke's telling of the story that people are hearing about Jesus, and at very least they're curious. Yeah. Right. So they're going out to see him, to hear, to witness what's happening. And I think there's some deep conviction in certain individuals. So you have the woman who reaches out and touches Jesus's cloak, because she wants to be healed, and be it like a last ditch effort or full faith, or, maybe some mixture of both, which feels pretty human. Something's happening, and people want to get close to Jesus and experience it for themselves. And then there's also individuals and groups together, like we see the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, who at this point are like plotting. They've begun to plot against Jesus. After
seeing, I think, particularly the healing of the paralytic, and the interaction about the forgiveness of sin, there's certainly a reputation being built. Yeah.
So I think, again, Luke wants to make it very clear that people are seeing what Jesus is doing, and either they are intrigued, curious, convicted, convinced, or they're, to some degree plotting, part of this religious group that, can't allow for this to happen. It's not happening. Maybe it's in their mind like the way it should, or with the people who should be involved and included. Why aren't we included? There's a little bit of that going on. So, I think it's fair to say that people are seeing what Jesus is doing and recognizing it as something significant and powerful. And yet we also see this, in John. I think in John's gospel especially. The way that narrative progresses, there are these constant lines, like right up until Jesus' death. The disciples still didn't fully understand. They still don't fully understand what's about to happen. But, when they see Jesus post-resurrection, then things start to fully click. And in the years that follow after, you assume that, I can imagine them going, oh my goodness, how did we miss that? Right? Just sitting around, remember when, what, that was so much more significant than we could have seen in the moment. So, I think there's some of that as well going on. That's why I say so, yes to all of it. Yeah. I think the thing that is clear, and I think probably fairly universally agreed on, is Luke is making it clear here. So I think in the writing of it, Luke wants us to see Moses. Yeah. That's intentional. Whether everybody in the crowd as Jesus came down from the mountain were like, this is Moses. It's a new, that's a stretch to say definitively, yes, absolutely. What we do know is that it's an intentional move for Luke. He wants us to see it. And it is indicative of the time. The mountain was the place of revelation from God, and it was seen as, in many ways, a place of prayer, a place where God is close, a place where God delivers messages to his people, and a place where we go to find out what God is doing and what we're doing and what needs to change and all of those things. So I do think that would have been instilled in certainly the Jewish observers. Be like, this is maybe not, Messiah, Son of God, Son of Man, fully God, fully man, maybe not all of those things, but I do think they would have been going, something's happening.
I'm just thinking this out in real time, but I also wonder if there's a little bit of a kind of a political underpinning with, contextually, Moses is in the wilderness, leading God's people to the promised land. right now for Israel, it probably feels like they're in the wilderness, even though they are settled in this land, but they're under Roman occupation. Yeah. And you have this, you know, Moses type figure. Okay, what's the message he's going to deliver from on high? You know, there's a little bit of that, you know, as we've seen leading up to Easter. This, okay, what is this going to be a political movement that this person is now going to bring that will speak to our current paradigm and reality?
I think that's good. I think that's good. There's this line, and I can't remember exactly where it is. Oh, it's going to bother me, but in part of the workings out of the law, the line is so that it may go well with you. And you know, I do think people are sitting there going like, well, things aren't going particularly well for us right now. What's that about? Yeah. And I do think there'd be some expectation or longing for. Yeah, absolutely. The whole zealot movement born out of things are not the way they're supposed to be. Yeah. We need to change them. The only way to change them is by military force. So away we go, right?
And what's kind of wild, and without, you know, getting too far into it, like when Jesus starts teaching, like these teachings are very charged. You know, even like love for enemies just being one. Yep. You know, like that. The things that he then brings are probably not what they anticipated or expected, but critical teachings for followers of Jesus.
There's no way to know this, but like I do think post sermon there'd be a lot more people disappointed than like pre-sermon. They're all riled up, they're ready to go.
You can imagine.
And then afterward they're like, are we sure?
Yeah,
because that sounds a lot harder than I was anticipating in not the right ways, right? Like it does, like it cuts to the core of our expectation. And even some of the language in Matthew, like you have heard it said, but I say to you, like Jesus is ramping this stuff up, not in a legalistic, make it or break it, do it or die kind of way, but in a
reframing an expansion. Well, and again, going with this idea of, you know, like Moses coming down from the mountain with the 10 Commandments, the 10 Commandments are good principles to live by. Like, you know, generally, you know, there's a reason why they've stood the test of time as good, you know, like don't lie, don't steal, don't murder, you know, don't like honor your parents. Right. And like, but in some ways, like they're hard to do, some of them. Hopefully it's not too difficult to not murder, but like, you know, they're not, you can read them and be like, yeah, I could do that. I could abide by those, you know, generally speaking. But then Jesus, like his teachings, they're so much harder, which we're going to unpack more in the weeks ahead. But so we don't want to, you know, jump too far ahead. But there is some interesting, you know, parallels and then not parallels.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And like we're gonna read lines like you know, that says, "Love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting to be repaid." Like we're just like, there's so much of what we would sort of consider to be like, quote, and if you're listening to this, I'm doing air quotes, like modern sensibilities. Be like, well, surely that doesn't apply anymore. And I go, well, you know, like, okay, you got to take some of this stuff seriously. You know, so yeah, it's going to get difficult in some very real, personal and corporate ways as individuals and as the church. But I think in some, it's just beautiful ways that have great potential to lead toward life. So
I'm excited.
I am too.
It's going to be fun, especially because some of the most intense teachings are on the weeks when we get to discuss it with like 100 other people in the room, and that'll be cool. That's great. Okay. So switching gears a little bit, we talked a little bit about disciple and apostle. So a disciple is a follower of Jesus. Someone who is, you know, like there were, you know, a rabbi would have many disciples who were adherents to their way of life and teaching. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And so an apostle is a word that means like messenger, sent one. Jesus distinguishes between the disciples and the apostles here. The disciple, a larger group of people, apostles, in this case, 12. We name them. And, you got all the different guys, some of them who they get a little bit of a story alongside them, like Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas, not that Judas, and then Judas, yes, that Judas, but it's worth, I think, talking about that word apostle. It's a word that in some Christian circles is reserved for only the biblical canon. There are some that would say once the church was established, they would say those were the apostles. You're not an apostle. I'm not an apostle. That's done. The apostolic era is over. And then on the other hand, there is another group, and I don't mind naming it because I think it's just worthwhile saying. So there's the new Apostolic Reformation, and I don't want to make it ultimately about them, but I think it's worth as a launching pad to talk a little bit about what actually is an apostle, what isn't an apostle, how do we think about apostles today. And how does our understanding contrast with some of the understandings that are out there today? That's a broad question. I think we can narrow a little bit. Maybe I should narrow it down by saying, or by asking, when you look at, say, the very conservative use of or lack thereof of the term apostle, how do we see that? And then how do we see maybe a perhaps overly liberal use of that term? I don't know. Yeah.
No, I think this is helpful because I even in prepping for this sermon, we talked a little bit on Thursday about that reality. Just, folks even in our congregation, very likely having different views and understandings and history with this type of word, right? I think there's a difference though between what the church would historically say or call an office. So the office of apostle, the office of prophet, priest, king,
teacher.
Yeah. So there's a difference between the office and then maybe what we would call gifts that are in line with those, and what I would say, I wouldn't call anybody that I know in my life, I wouldn't name them capital P prophet.
Right.
But I would say that there are some people in my life who are prophetic.
Yeah.
That's their, one of their gifts is to be able to speak prophetically into people's lives. Now, usually those are the people who actually try to avoid naming themselves prophet. Typically the ones who come the boldest and quickest with a prophetic word are the ones who don't actually have gifting in that area or who want to take on the mantle of prophet.
It's the people who have a fear and trembling that oh my gosh, I think I have something. I think God has said something to me or has, that there is a weightiness to it. And if we don't have the weightiness to it, I've got concerns.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I had somebody early on in ministry, just in leadership in general, but early on when I was in ministry, somebody said, just when you enter into a new situation, context, organization, church, whatever it is, go slowly and take extra precaution with people who try to win over too much influence from you too fast. And I have had interesting conversations over the years with individuals who I could look back and say, oh yeah, okay, all right, yeah, very first person trying to gain too much influence or too much of an ear, just too much Yeah, authority, be it whatever it is. And so I think there's a slowed down way in which to approach the gifts that are named in Scripture, right? So don't rush to name it for yourself. I think that's a great place to start. Number one. So office. I think let me try as quick an answer as possible here. I think there are, again, offices that we would consider are accomplished in and through the person of Jesus ultimately. And so I brought, because I knew we had heads up. I had a heads up on this question.
I was wondering why that was there.
So in our denomination, we're Reformed. So we're Presbyterian, which is part of the Reformed tradition, and we have in our tradition what are called subordinate standards. And they're subordinate standards because they are lesser than, they're subordinate to the Bible. So they're not inspired by God. They're not on the same level, but they are agreed to be the confessions, creeds, theologies, corporately worked out that capture a shared faith. And one of the things one of the questions in the Westminster Confession of Faith, which is one of our subordinate standards as Presbyterian Church in Canada, is question 42, which I'm going to try to not say all the ifs and eth and doth. Like it is.
Because when was this written?
Not it's been a minute. So the question 42 is, why was our mediator, so why was Jesus called Christ? And the answer is, our mediator was called Christ because he was anointed with the Holy Spirit above measure, and so set apart and fully furnished with all authority and ability to execute the offices of prophet, priest, and king of his church in the estate both of his humiliation and exaltation. So in who he was as human and who he is as divine, as God, in his death, in his life, in his resurrection life, in and through all of it, that Jesus has full authority and full ability to execute offices of prophet, priest, and king. So Jesus is the ultimate, once and for all, prophet, priest, and king. So prophet, he speaks on behalf of God. He is the full word, so to use language that would be common for Christians, a word of God, but revelation of God. He's the fullest revelation of who God is toward humanity we understand in the person of Jesus. So he is, to the fullest extent, prophet, speaking on behalf of God. As God, he is priest. He is the high priest, the one who with his own death and resurrection paid for, and we don't have to get into today, another episode, theories of atonement, but, fulfills the role of high priest in his death. And so does away with sacrifice. And then he is king, rules over his church and the world. Also in here as mediator, as one who constantly intervenes and works on our behalf toward God, right? And then it goes in, and I'm not going to read all of it, but how does Christ execute the office of prophet, of priest, of king? So the confession would say that Jesus is prophet, priest, and king. And I think the church, we would probably agree that there are still giftings in those areas as well that are useful to the church today, that continue to be displayed in people. But we know, or at least we need to know and understand, that Jesus is ultimately prophet, priest, and king. He defines what that is and how that rolls out in his kingdom. And our giftedness is subordinate, in that sense, to Jesus's role in those places. So we don't step into those offices like Jesus does. And it is not the same, because Jesus is who Jesus is, and these apostles are human. But in some way, I think I have a similar understanding of apostle, that these 12, because we're dealing with Luke 6 and not, so after Judas dies, they replace Judas so that there continues to be 12, which just adds weight to the number.
We also refer often to Paul as an apostle.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that, which at least initially got himself in trouble doing it, right?
Yeah,
like it was even debated within the early church, the Jerusalem church, and, dragged Paul in front of them, and they're trying to figure out, like, who is this guy, and is he actually an apostle? Because this office of apostle does seem to be linked to these specific individuals who were literal eyewitnesses to the accounts, to the life of Jesus, his teaching, and then who Jesus anoints to bear his same message into the world with his authority and to carry on the foundation of the church. So I don't think that anybody steps into that same office of apostle in the same way that these did. Or that Paul did, because that office served a role in a very specific moment of the church's life. Now, equally though, I don't think that the gifting of like apostolic giftedness or gifting that is toward apostleship, being a messenger, if you're just kind of carve away all of what we can create something into and just use the language, which is what I try to do on Sunday. I think there is something for every Christian to take away from the language of being and becoming a messenger, one who bears the life of the kingdom in our bodies with us as we go, one who has authority to speak and to act and to do the things of the kingdom.
And you even see that so I just pulled up Romans 16, where Paul is referring, he's doing all these big greetings, and he refers to Phoebe, who I believe we understand as the messenger of the letter, that she came and would read the letter and in some ways interpret the letter. And so in some ways she is doing an apostolic role there. And then and later on, it refers to Junia, who is someone who is named as outstanding among the apostles, right? So there's something kind of cool about, I just wanted to name two women, especially because I don't think, some people will say, well, it's just that there were 12 men and that was it. It's like, oh, actually, no, there were some apostolic figures who were women.
Right, right. So we need 12 elders to continue to rule the church, and they can only be men, and away we go, which is a completely different topic for another day.
For sure. But I just thought, like it's the office of the apostolic nature of God's people should not ever end. Right. And then in Ephesians 4, Paul kind of lists what we call apest, the apostle, the prophet.
That's what I pulled up.
Right?
Go
ahead, read it.
Now these are the gifts Christ gave to the church.
Yes.
Right. So that would seem to indicate some level of those giftings still continue, right? The apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and the teachers. And this is what people, I think this is what people need to hear as well. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work and build up the church, the body of Christ. This will continue until we all come to such unity in our faith and knowledge of God's Son that we will be mature in the Lord, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ.
Yeah.
So there's a continuation there that I don't think we've attained.
Nope, definitely
right?
not. Yeah.
And but I also think listen, there's like you said, use your word, which is a great word. There's weightiness to it. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work. And that's where I think this is where I land harder on embracing the call of the apostles to be witnesses, to be messengers, to carry it in our bodies, to live it out day to day. Because I think we can, as Christians, we can often get caught up in the benefits of Christ without bearing the full weight of responsibility of Christ, which like New Begin works out. So I brought another book because
I just thought they were for decoration.
Yeah, no, they're not just props. New Begin's got this, and I'm gonna have to find it. Yeah. So okay, so he's got this great way of talking and writing. So he says, so what he would call Christians are chosen bearers of like the promised blessing. And so he says bearers, not exclusive beneficiaries.
Right.
So there's a responsibility to go and do the things of the kingdom, not just to benefit from the things of the kingdom.
Yeah.
And we can, I mean, I just think, and maybe this is like, maybe me, like I was just like, can I just soak up the benefits for a minute? Like, right? Like there is benefit to living inside the kingdom. Like, let's not say there isn't. There ought to be. Like, it is a new way of living that is life-giving toward flourishing. Might not look exactly like what you want or expect, but there's a benefit to knowing Jesus. We can kind of sit in it though and be like, oh, great, I made it. I'm here. I'm going to enjoy these benefits. And that's where he says, no, you bear the kingdom. You don't benefit from the kingdom. Well, you do. You do benefit. You also bear it toward others.
The implication with that word bear is that it's a burden in some way. It's like that there is a there should be a burden to someone who has received a word from the Lord.
Absolutely.
You know, same with someone with apostolic gifting, that there should be a weightiness and a burden that is theirs to bear. There's
a weightiness, and you and I know this, and we've talked about it. There's a weightiness to preaching.
Yes.
Right? Like and that's not to say that we don't enjoy it. Like I love what I get to do, and I love preaching. But there is a weight to it that's hard to describe.
Yeah.
In the same way, and it's not the same, but like in the same way that I don't know the weight of, I'll say like a paramedic who walks into a situation and be like, am I going to have to save somebody's life today?
Yeah.
Like a firefighter, right? Am I going to have to pull somebody out of a burning building? There is a weight to that I have no idea of. There's a weightiness to these things. So New Begin continues, and this is the open secret, which is his introduction to theology of mission. And New Begin, I think, is brilliant in helping the church understand healthy mission, like in our own backyard.
And he lived it out.
Absolutely.
Like, he wasn't just a thinker; he was a doer, and then wrote about it.
Missionary in India, part of the monumental movement, like Church of India, that really almost maybe single-handedly redefined what it meant to be ecumenical. Yeah, in some really cool ways. So he writes there, and he's talking here about Israel being elect. And there being a burden to that, and where he's going to go is so like the church, Christians being elect requires there's a burden there, right? So he says there lay the constant temptation. Again and again, it had to be said that election is for responsibility, not privilege. Again and again. And so, like I said, he says, unfaithful Israel had to be threatened with punishment because it was the elect of God. And then he quotes from Amos, you only have I known of all the families of the earth, therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities. So he says the meaning of Israel's election and of its misunderstanding of it is depicted with the supreme dramatic power in the story of Jonah. And then he goes on to talk about how Jonah called to go to Nineveh. He's like, absolutely not. I'm going to go in the exact, and it's almost like it's poetic comedy. Yeah. Like I'm going to go in the exact opposite direction, and I'm going to flee as far as I possibly can to a ridiculous degree. Yeah. And
God's like, no, you're not.
Yeah. So he ends up on this ship, and there's a massive storm. He's hiding in the the boat, and the pagan sailors are praying to God for deliverance.
Yeah.
Even in his rebellion, he's fulfilling his calling to be a witness to who God, to who the true God is. And anyways, the story unfolds.
The city repents, and then he gets mad about it.
Exactly.
And there is something about there that is, it is revealing of what has happened in, Israel's heart, in that, their original call as a chosen people were to be a blessing to the nations.
Yeah. And so one of my deepest hearts for our church community, for all church communities really, but for us pastors here, in our city, is that we would fully embrace that same weighty election.
Yeah.
Toward responsibility, toward hard work for the sake of the other. Because, as cliche as it is, good people die every day without knowing Jesus. And also, good people die every day hungry. And good people die every day on the streets, houseless. And people are wrestling with brokenness inside their homes. Yeah. And we carry the weight of the kingdom in a way that is meant to push against those dark places. So that's one of the things I love, and I hope this came across. I do love this about our church. I think that there's beauty in sharing communion together, and I think there's beauty in digging in the dirt on Saturday together, a bunch of people were doing.
We did, both those things this past weekend, which is kind of great.
Right,
yeah.
But I think that in some ways captures what we ought to be about.
Yeah. So when we just returning back to that word apostle, because we've been talking around it a little bit, but how do we think about? There are some streams that would use that word as a title, in the same way that people might call you Pastor Grant or myself Pastor Justin. They would say, I am Apostle Grant or Apostle Justin.
I'll never do that.
No.
Is that a clear enough answer? Yeah,
it's very clear. But more broadly, is that maybe just to be contrarian, if you can go read Ephesians 4 and see that there's an office of pastor, could there not be a category for saying someone is more pastoral, someone is more of a teacher, someone's more apostolic, someone's more of a prophet, so therefore we're going to call them by their title,
primary gifting.
Yeah,
right. So here's my 2 cents worth of, I don't know, 1 cent. My sense of it is there is something in me that pushes against it. But equally, I've had good friends and shared leading services over the years with Catholic priests who love Jesus and who are doing incredible things. I was able to share in leading services together. While I was working as a chaplain in a psychiatric hospital with a Catholic priest there, who, I'm not saying, well, Jesus is the only priest, you can't be priest. And equally, I would say, well, like Peter talks about the priesthood of all believers. So there's still that language exists. And yet I would firmly say, no, Jesus is the fulfillment of that office of priest. Yeah. So, I think there's room there. For me, the main thing is recognizing also, and is maybe important to name, that I think we see this in churches and cultures that I don't come from. I'll say that for me, right? More predominantly in other countries than Canada, and in different cultures that I don't walk in and understand. So I want to be careful with that as well.
That's a good word.
Just naming that.
Yeah.
I think though, if somebody is ordained a pastor by a body of Christians, then that's something I'm going to carry with weight. And I'm going to respect with weight and sit with. It doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything. Absolutely not. Doesn't mean that we're not going to I'm not going to just receive absolutely everything you have to say necessarily.
Yeah.
But if a group of Christians have together discerned in prayer and with the guidance of the Holy Spirit to lay like a title or a mantle on somebody, to call somebody, to use like our language, to call somebody into that office, that role, then I think that's something we just have to carry with care and concern. Like just move carefully in it. If it's something that a title that somebody takes on in and of themselves, I'd be willing to say that I think that is just a problematic way to start.
Yes.
Okay. So I think there's nuance there.
Yeah.
Like I didn't ordain myself pastor, and I didn't call myself pastor until I was ordained. And actually for me, like I don't go by reverend because I actually think there's more weight to pastor.
Yes.
I feel it, at least for myself.
Yep.
Reverend is a cultural, much more like much more recent term within the church, and has much more to do with power and authority than it does or ought to service and weightiness to ministry. So that's why for me, I try to, as much as possible, I go by Pastor Grant. I think that makes more sense to people who don't have a sweet clue. Like you walk into a church for the first time, you're like, okay, like what's going to make the most sense? But actually, personally, I feel more weight to that.
I only ever use Reverend if I'm writing like official communique, like as a reference letter for like the government. You know?
Yeah,
because it's a title that they understand, right?
Absolutely.
And so versus pastor, which can be more nebulous. But yeah.
Agreed. 100% I agree. And I do the same thing. Just like, I'll wear a clerical collar when I walk into sick kids.
Yeah.
Because it is helpful, right? Like I'm here to serve and with some urgency. So, can we help one another find where we're trying to go? But I think it's worth saying, like you and I were both ordained by groups of Christians, by congregations, by denominations. Like that is an important part of how we got to where we are, is that there were other people calling that out of us and naming it and affirming it and then ultimately ordaining.
Yes.
And that I think continues to be a really important measure for individuals of what I think is or can be. It's not. We're not always right. We're not always like we don't know. But what is a healthy approach to these offices and titles?
And so to sort of cap this discussion, when we look at some of these different roles that Christians may have strength in, may have lesser strength in. I think it's fair to say, and this is I attribute a little bit of this to some of the like church futurist thinkers, guys like Alan Hirsch, who've done a lot of thinking about this, where they would say the apostolic gifts that they describe in Ephesians 4, that is Jesus, similar to prophet, priest, king. Jesus is the perfect embodiment of all of those. And that as we become more Christ-like, we should grow in all those. That as we are, even just to go through them, as we are growing in Christ-likeness, we will feel a greater urge toward being messengers of God's kingdom. That as we are growing in Christ, that we will be more attuned to who God is and what God might be saying in a circumstance. as we grow in Christ, we will become more willing to share of our faith with those around us, evangelists. As we grow in our faith, we will shepherd people better. We will be better lovers of people, that we will care better for people. As we will also become better pastors, teachers, all these things, right? That we can all grow in these. And yet I would still probably reserve a little bit of, thought that some of our bent, some of our just perhaps even God-given bents are going to be that we're going to be better at some of those, in this lifetime, like I can think of people I know that they wouldn't call themselves apostle, but that I would look at them and say, they have just like an apostolic spirit about them where they're just willing to go where God calls them to go. They'll just get up and leave. And I'm like, that's amazing. We need people like that in the church. Yeah.
So I think just to double down on what you've said, the main thing that we want people doing is striving to be more like Jesus.
Yes.
And in our attempts to be more like Jesus, gifts are going to be given, right? Anointing will happen. The Holy Spirit's going to empower you to do some pretty cool things. Maybe some scary things, maybe some things that you never would have found yourself doing, but it's not because you're striving for a position. It's because you are trying to be more like Jesus.
Yeah. Make that the goal. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's good. That feels like a pretty good place to close out, I think.
To wrap up, yeah. One of the lingering questions that I have that I think we might tackle, just to give a little bit of a taste of over the next 4 weeks while we're doing the community Bible study. One of the questions that I have lingering from this kind of opening is this the same sermon as the Sermon on the Mount? Like Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount?
We're going to solve it.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to crack it.
Or is it different, a different time, two sermons spoken, different places, same place, all of it. Some of those technical pieces that, you never answer in a sermon because you're like, this is not the time or place.
It doesn't matter. But it nags at you a little bit.
But it just goes like, where are the places? So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fun. And we hope that this is encouraging to you. Please, especially over these next 4 weeks, we're hoping that more of you are listening to this podcast, not because we want just more views, whatever, but because we think that between the sermon and the Bible study and the podcast together,
we're going to cover a lot of ground.
The goal is not to just repeat all the things, but to have each of those different places and spaces and modalities be a different angle on these texts. So we hope you're along for the ride and send us your questions as we go. Even if you want to look ahead and read some of these passages through Luke 6, where we're going to be hanging through the community Bible study through this month. Send us your questions in advance if you'd like as well. But we hope that's encouraging for your day today, wherever it finds you. And we will see you in the next episode.